Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really digging into the foundations of modern communism.
Yeah, looking at the sources behind it all.
Exactly. We're exploring the lives, the ideas of Karl Marx and his collaborator, Friedrich Engels. Our mission really is to show you how these early, maybe kind of vague notions of equality
Right.
turn into this really rigorous theory of revolution that, well, changed everything.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, how one person, Marx, who wasn't widely known at first, created the actual tools, the frameworks that sparked revolutions and reshaped whole economies. We'll look at the context around him.
Definitely. So let's unpack that journey. How did Marx get there? Sources tell us Karl Marx, born 1818, Trier, Prussia, middle-class background,
Yep.
studied philosophy, got really into Hegelian dialectics, this idea of conflict driving change.
But he started questioning the idealist part, right? The idea that ideas are the main driver.
Exactly. He became critical. And then the really key moment, meeting Friedrich Engels in 1844.
Yes. A huge turning point. And Engels, well, almost surprising, son of a wealthy German industrialist.
Right. Seems counterintuitive.
It does, but it meant he saw capitalist exploitation up close firsthand, brutally so.
That must have been powerful insight.
Absolutely. His book, The Condition of the Working Class in England, that came out in 1945, and it gave Marx so much material, so much evidence.
And they wrote together.
Oh yeah, foundational stuff, the Holy Family, the German ideology, and of course, the Communist Manifesto.
And the funding aspect. Engels basically supported Marx financially.
For much of his life. It's a critical detail, often just glossed over. Imagine the critique of capitalism funded by capital.
Quite the irony. So, okay, they're partners. What's the revolutionary idea at the heart of Marx's thinking?
Well, it's this radical flip, isn't it? He rejected Hegel's idealism, the ideas run the world thing.
Okay.
Marx said, no, it's the material conditions, how we produce things, how society's organized economically. That's the engine driving history, the mode of production.
That's a massive shift. So what does that mean, practically speaking, for us, for how we understand things?
Well, it poses a fundamental question for you, doesn't it? What actually shapes your reality? Marx put it very directly in his preface to a contribution to the critique of political economy. He said, it is not the consciousness of men that determines their being, but their social being that determines their consciousness.
So, simpler terms.
Your job, your economic class, the society you're in, that shapes how you think, what you believe, who you are. More than just ideas floating around.
Okay, I see. That's profound.
It really is. That's historical materialism.
Yeah.
And his big work, Capital Das Capital, dives deep into criticizing capitalism.
And introducing concepts like...
Key ones like surplus value. That's the value workers create beyond their own wages, which for Marx is the source of profit. Unpaid labor, essentially. And alienation. That deep feeling of being disconnected, not just from the things you make, but from your own work, your own potential as a human being.
Wow. And he thought capitalism would eventually implode.
He saw inherent contradictions, things within the system that would ultimately lead to its own collapse.
Okay, so we have the theory, the critique, but what about the call to action? The thing that really got out there.
That has to be the Communist Manifesto, 1848. Such a fiery little book.
Workers of the world, unite.
Exactly. And powerful lines like, all history is the history of class struggles. The idea that the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, basically creates its own opposition. The proletariat, the working class, its own grave diggers, as he put it.
Still incredibly famous.
Absolutely. And Marx saw capitalism as just a phase, like feudalism came before it. He predicted a dictatorship of the proletariat would follow.
A transitional phase.
Yes, a transition where workers take power to dismantle the old system, get rid of private ownership of the means of production, factories, land, etc.
Leading ultimately to
a classless, stateless society. Communism. So it wasn't just armchair philosophy. It was meant as a blueprint for revolution.
Even though he wasn't famous when he died in 1883.
Right. Relatively unknown. But his ideas, especially with Engels publishing more volumes of Capital after his death, they just took off. Inspired movements, shaped global politics.
So wrapping this up for you, our listener, what's the takeaway from this deep dive?
Well, Marx didn't invent wanting a fairer world. Lots of people dreamed of that.
True.
But our sources show he, along with Engels, built the intellectual machinery. The theories, the analysis, the framework to understand why the world was unfair in their view, and how theoretically it could be changed.
They tried to turn it into a scientific socialism, right? Not just wishful thinking.
Exactly, a comprehensive program.
Which leaves us with a question for you to think about.
Yeah, if Marx is right, if our social and economic reality shapes our thinking, how are the massive changes happening now? Technology, globalization, all of it. How might those material shifts be quietly shaping your beliefs, your values today?
Definitely sending them all over.
For sure.
Well, we hope this dive gave you some useful insights, maybe a clearer shortcut to understanding this really pivotal figure. Thanks for joining us.